This is Professor Game, where we interview successful practitioners of games, gamification, and game thinking who bring us the best of their experiences to get ideas, insights, and inspiration that help us in the process of getting the students to learn what we teach. And I am Rob Alvarez. I'm a consultant and founder of Professor Game and professor of gamification and game-based solutions at IE Business School, EFMD, EVS University, and other places around the world. And if this content is for you, please go ahead and subscribe for free to our email list at professorgame.com/subscribe. Well, hello and welcome to this intro to gamification. I am Rob Alvarez from Professor Game. If you can contact with me or with Professor Game in general, you can definitely find us on LinkedIn and many other places. But let's actually go ahead and get started. So what is gamification is the first thing that you might be thinking of if you're starting to get into this world of gamification, if you're curious about what's going on. And here's where I am going to tell you that there's some mixed news here, right? So the first news is we have not been able yet to formally agree into a unique definition of what gamification is as a discipline. There's many different definitions. There's different people that think different things, and that's, at least for the moment, it's fine. It's the way things are working. We can manage with that. And what I'm going to give you, since we don't have a formal, unique definition, like you look up, I don't know, sustainability, you look it up and there is a definition for sustainability. You look up, what is operations in a company, and, there's a definition in marketing and so on. Gamification is still a work in progress in many ways. So what I'm going to give you here is some of the definitions of top leading experts around the world. And of course, I'm going to give you my version of what that looks like. All right, so let's get started. First one is from Sebastian de Terting. Sebastian is a leading academic in the world of gamification. He was one of the first ones to start using the term, to start doing research and many other things. And what does Sebastian, and he's probably the most quoted, has the most quoted definition in the world of the internet, but definitely in the academic world. Well, Professor Sebastian de Terting says that gamification is the use of game design elements in non-game contexts. So it is very specific in saying that if it is a game, it is not gamification. Some people agree and say, yes, it has to be very clearly cut, defined, and differentiated. Others are a bit more flexible in that sense and say, well, it could be, maybe not. We'll see about other definitions, but that is a very good starting point for sure. Sebastian de Terting, the use of game design elements in non-game contexts, again, it's a very formal definition as well, and it gives us a very good idea of what gamification can be, right? It's using game design outside of games, essentially. Yeah. Well, then we have Yu-Kai Chao. Yu-Kai Chao is almost like, in a way, the opposite of Sebastian, right? Yu-Kai Chao is a consultant. He is a world-leading practitioner in gamification, one of the first ones as well. He has the book that has, as far as I know at least, in gamification, is the one that has sold the most copies, the one that has been translated into a bunch of languages as well. It's very well known, and he has a framework called the Octalysis framework, which is specifically used to create stuff in gamification, essentially, right? So, of course, we need to look at what does Yu-Kai Chao think of all this, and his definition looks like this. He says that gamification is a craft of deriving all the fun and addicting elements found in games and applying them to real-world or productive activities. Here, notice that there's, even though in the end they say something very, very similar, Yu-Kai does give a distinction here where he doesn't entirely or explicitly exclude games. He is saying, how can we bring the good stuff from games, essentially, the fun? And he talks about the word addicting. You'll get me there. We'll get there in a second. Elements found in games and applying them to other types of situations, right? Real world or productive activities, right? Things that are outside of the game itself. So you're using what you learn or understand from games and you're applying it to the real world or productive activities. Just to watch out with this definition, I always tell this to my students, especially because we might have cognitive scientists and people who really understand addiction very, very well. Be careful. Addicting in this sense is more sort of a buzzword in many ways. I think from what I've heard from Yu-Kai, it's more of what does what do games do that get people sort of glued to their screens or glued to the game or very interested, very engaged, more than actually generating what formally could be defined as an addiction, right? Keep it there just in case. Or maybe you read that and say, oh my goodness, addiction, that's kind of a strong word. Well, yes, it is. So again, beware. It's not necessarily what we're looking after, right? Final one I'm going to show you. This is Andrzej Marchewski. He could, at least in my view, he could be kind of a combination of the previous two in a way, because Andrzej, he is not currently dedicated explicitly to gamification. However, he has been a consultant a lot of time, but he is better known in the world of gamification as what I would like to call sort of a thinker, an analyzer of what is going on in the world of gamification. He thinks stuff very, very thoroughly, writes about them, blogs about them, analyzes stuff very, very deeply as well, and shows all of this in his blog, Gamified, gamified.uk, if I'm not mistaken, or .co.uk. I'm not really sure right now. Actually, I think we have it here. So if I put gamified.uk. He has a blog, amazing blog, very, very good reading. He's been writing for over a decade, I think, at this point. It's 2023 right now. So definitely recommend it. What is his definition of gamification, or was? I think he switched recently to something else. He made a game out of that definition. But when I created this, what he was saying was, it is the use of game design, game elements, and play for non-entertainment purposes. All right. So again, another leading expert in the field of gamification. He also has a book, Ninja Monkeys Like to Play as well. I forgot the name. I have it right here. Even Ninja Monkeys Like to Play. Yes, Even Ninja Monkeys Like to Play. Very good book as well. Very oriented as well to the world of gamification. He's actually updating. He's in the process of updating the book, so it might change the name or it might change the look. I've been talking to him about this, and it could be coming something very, very interesting. All right, so these are three of the terms that are thrown out there, right, that are being used as a definition of gamification. As you can see, Sebastia's is a bit more strict, so to speak. It's games and non-games. These are non-games. Gamification is using the stuff from games when it's not in a game. Yukai sort of opens the door a bit more. Andrzej as well, but he says as well as for non-entertainment purposes. And it's funny, you'll see from my definition, mine is very, very similar to Andrzej's. We kind of worked on it probably at a similar time, because when I read his, it's like, this is interesting. It looks very similar to what I use. So I'm going to share with you what is gamification. According to me, this is at least the definition that I use on my workshops, that I use in my classes, that I use with clients to help people understand a bit more what this gamification world is all about. So my working definition is the use of game design, game elements, and play. There you see the very similar side with Andrzej Marchewski for purposes that go beyond entertainment. So I don't say non-entertainment because I do argue, and this was part of what I was talking with Andrzej at some point, I do argue that you could be creating something that is entertaining, right? It's not a problem. It's not a bad thing. But it also comes from the space of Andrzej also has, again, he's thought about these things very much. It's problem is some people, when they refer to gamification, you kind of imagine that it has to be a lot of fun and people's like super fun and super engaged. And well, yes, that happens, but it doesn't have to happen. And it doesn't even have to happen for it to be good, right? There could be good gamification that is not exhilarating, super fun games, but it's, as he has said, I think it was in a conference that I heard him say, even if you have an activity that really is a terrible activity, nobody wants to do, and you make it a tiny little bit better, that is already a very good use of gamification because you're getting people to engage with something that they were not engaging with, right? And that kind of brings us into the next part that I want to discuss. Next part is, and this is fundamental, this is where everything actually starts. When you have an idea of what gamification is, and again, those definitions that we found before, they give us at least a general idea of, games are good at doing something, right? We learn from them, from that thing that they're good at doing, and we use it somewhere else, right? And the entertainment, non-entertainment, the basic thing is, as Yukai says, real world and or productive activities, right? So it's not for the sake of the game itself, it is for the benefit of something else, right? And that something else can be education, which is one of the things that I focus on the most. It could be marketing, it could be market research, it could be human resources, right? Sort of engagement, employee engagement, training. There's many places, many areas where you can apply this too. So again, you're applying it from what you learned, lessons, the interesting things that games have, and you apply it to one of these or several of these areas in your professional or personal life. Yeah? So that is definition. After the definition, it is very important to understand why would we use gamification? Because disclaimer here, full transparency, gamification requires effort. Gamification requires effort, and a lot of it oftentimes, right? So doing something without gamification, most of the times when creating it, is going to be easier, simpler, or at least it's going to require less work and less thought than doing it using gamification. So you want to have a good reason to use gamification when you're engaging in a project, right? So that's the thing. You're saying, well, yeah, I want to use it. It's the buzzword, yeah? And that's something we get a lot from clients. Oh, I want to use gamification. Oh, yeah. Why do you want to use gamification? And that's a key moment on really understanding and unwrapping why it is that a client or you yourself want to use gamification, and definitely because it's the buzzword, which it probably isn't at this point anymore. It's 2023. It's still very broadly used. There's a lot of people looking for gamification, but it's not what it used to be back in 2012, 13, 14, 15, that it was like, you went to LinkedIn, half the profiles of people said expert in gamification, even though many of them didn't really know what the term was all about. Nowadays, there are, people, there's very good bunch of people working in the area. There's even people who actually do gamification who don't call it gamification. So because it's not a buzzword anymore, and there's been some people who liked or disliked more. So some people are kind of changing their profiles or their names or whatever, so that gamification is not actually what they're calling it, right? But again, we get to the core of this whole thing, which is why would you want to go through this effort of using gamification, of convincing a very serious CEO, for example, right? That says, oh, here we're a very serious company, so we cannot be using games for any of these things. I actually hate games, so why would you use that to, improve my marketing? And that's nonsense, right? So going through the effort of convincing that person, and after convincing them, getting the budget, working on the project, doing all of that effort of including gamification or designing something from scratch so that it's gamified and generates something, right? You have to have a very good reason. And in general terms, in very, very broad terms, what I can tell you is, in my experience, what I've seen, and again, with all the episodes of the podcast I've recorded with my guests, my personal or professional experience, the conferences I've been to, it usually, I would say 99% of the times, at least of what I've observed, it all boils down to one or two different things. And those things are engagement, right? So you're lacking engagement in some way, shape, or form in the organization, with your app if it's digital, with a job, with the marketing campaign that was created, with whatever it is, you're lacking engagement, or people are not coming back after, and they should be coming back. You're expecting them to come back, or they never get into that. For example, when we're in education, you expect students to do a reading, for example, and they never do it. Or you're expecting them to come prepared to class to be able to discuss this or that, and they don't come prepared. Or you want them in class to do this, and they don't do it because for whatever reason. So you have an engagement problem. And again, in education, I would say that we're in places where education is accessible to everyone, sort of in the non-third world countries, as it's usually said. When access is not a problem, I do think that there is a massive crisis of engagement in education. Massive, right? So this is a big problem solver for many of us educators out there. The other one has to do with something that is relatively similar, which is motivation. People lack the motivation to do a certain action or series of actions, or to engage in a certain habit, or to have the motivation to go for that habit and turning it into a habit. When you lack motivation, gamification can be a good, if what you're looking for is motivation, gamification could definitely be a good solution. And the other one, which is again related to this, is changing behaviors, right? So people are doing, for example, in the company, they're doing a certain procedure a certain way, and there's a good reason, and that reason could be anywhere from there's something better, a better way to do it, to all the way to, again, the CEO said we have to do things this way, and everybody has to do it that way. For whatever reason it is, hopefully it is a good and ethical one. If you need to have some change of the behavior, the actual behavior, what people are actually doing, you want to change what people are doing, gamification can be a very good answer. And if it's done correctly, you can definitely solve that problem of changing the behavior of those employees or that organization or that group or that team, whatever that looks like, right? So why gamification? Again, typically it has to do with solving for engagement, motivation, habits, or certain behavior change that you're looking for, right? Hopefully that was clear. Now you have some basics of why would you even be interested in gamification, what it's all about, there's many definitions going around out there. And again, my invitation is if you're starting in this world and you are feeling a little bit confused by all the terms that people are using out there, kind of ignore the huge discussions that there are on, oh, this is gamification. Yes, but this other thing is actually simulations, and this is game-based learning, and this is game-based solutions, and this is game thinking. And kind of forget about that for a moment and take one of the definitions that we saw before, or another one, whichever you like the most, and try to use it. I like mine because it is kind of a little bit more of an umbrella definition. It allows for many of the things that I mentioned before to fall under this. Because in the end, especially if you're starting, what you want to make sure, and we'll see that in future videos, what you will be seeing, right, is that essentially this is a way of thinking through a solution to a certain set of problems. Whether the final solution looks like A, B, C, D, E, or F, at this point, that is not really going to be super relevant for you. And let me tell you something else. Eventually, if you do this for clients, for your boss, it is not really going to be relevant for them either. Exactly how do you call it, right? So if they don't like the word gamification or game-based solutions because it has the definition of game inside of it and they feel that they're too serious for that, maybe you want to call it something else. Like there's people using, for example, behavioral design as a very, very similar term in many ways for many other things. You want to use behavioral designer? Fine, that's okay, because one thing that I do tell you and I do argue very strongly about is that gamification is a design discipline. And we'll be looking into this deeper once we look at the other contents that we will be creating about this, all right? So hopefully, if you have any questions, you'll be able to reach out to us, hopefully through LinkedIn is the easiest way to get in contact. You look for Professor Game on LinkedIn, you'll definitely find our web. You'll find my profile as well. Feel free to connect with either. I'll be happy to answer any questions you have about this.